Hello and welcome to the third installment of my Aztec chocolate making video, or Mexica chocolate making video, because the Aztecs were originally known as the Mexica, and that's where the name of the country Mexico comes from, for those who didn't know. So what we're doing today is the grinding stage. So the noise in the background, I don't know if you can hear it, but there's the chocolate grinder running, and I'll show you that in a second. And I use the mechanical grinder for grinding the bulk of the chocolate, just because it's a large volume of beans and it takes a while. And the mechanical grinder that I use uses stone rollers and a granite rollers and a granite base, so it's kind of using stone on stone, which is very traditional and doesn't introduce any metallic flavors into the chocolate. I mean, to be honest, stainless steel doesn't. It's a very non-reactive metal, but I prefer using the traditional methodologies wherever possible. So the a granite surface mechanical grinder is a good halfway. It's a good compromise. And then I'm also going to be grinding a small amount of the beans by hand on the traditional piece of kit for that, which is known in Spanish in Mexico as the metate en mano. The metate is a stone grinding table or grinding stone, and the mano is the piece that you hold that actually does the grinding. It's like the equivalent of the mortar and pestle in Europe, but instead of having a circular bowl, like a hemispherical concave bowl, like a mortar, and a pounding sort of action, a piston action with the pestle, you've got a flat surface. It's actually a type of quern, which Q-U-E-R-N, which just means grinding stone, but this specific type was developed in Mesoamerica. That's Central and South America before the arrival of Columbus, pre-Columbian Mesoamerica. It has very ancient roots. The Aztecs, or the Mexica, referred to the metate en mano as the metatl, which is the metate, which is the grinding table, and the mano, which of course is a Spanish name, it means hand, they called the metlapil. So they called it the metlapil, and that became in Spanish the mano, and the metatl became the metate. Anyway, I'll show you all the equipment and grinding the beans in a sec. Right. Okay, so first we've got the chocolate grinder here, which you can see is running. Let me see if I can get a better angle without getting all the leads tangled up and stuff. So you can see it's basically got these two granite rollers here, which are rotating in opposite directions, and the whole floor of this unit is made up of granite, and that's rotating the opposite way. So this has been running for about 4 or 5 hours now. So the beans, which I poured in, I heated the beans up a little bit first and then poured them in. And the reason I heated the beans up first was because the machine can seize and get stuck if you pour in cold beans. So if I just stop it for a second, so you can see all that liquid chocolate at the bottom. And it does have a lid here, which I can put on, but I want the lid off because effectively, if I leave this machine running for several hours, I'll probably leave it to run for 8 or 9 hours, it acts as a conch, which is, sorry about the focus, it's having problems. There we go. It acts as a conch, which is a device which grinds and pulverizes and smashes the chocolate continuously over several hours. And as it does so, not only does it improve the texture, but a lot of volatiles evaporate. So you do get some loss of the complexity of the chocolate smell and flavor, but more importantly, you get a reduction in the acids. A lot of the acids produced following fermentation evaporate during this process. So that's the mechanical portion, which is the bulk of the beans. And then I'll show how I make these into little discs later when I've left it to run for another few hours. Okay, so this is the second bit of kit, which is the metate. This one, the stone grinding table, the metate or metatl, and this is the mano or metlapil for grinding the beans. You can see there's some beans on here that I've just started to grind. If I can show you, I've got my little bowl of beans that I need to hand grind here. and these are just for sort of scraping down the surface and keeping it clean as I grind things. This little board here is something that I made, so it has a block here into which 1 foot of the metate, which traps 1 foot of it, and then unfortunately I have a lot of leads and wires and stuff to rig this little camera up, which you're going to see, but never mind. On the other side of it, you've got 2 little blocks that hold it in place, so while I'm grinding, this provides a clean, sterilized surface that I can grind on, so to speak. Grind my beans on, just to be explicit. Alright, so here's the view from the other side. Now, what you can, it's a very little metate, this one, it's very small, and you see the mano actually broke, the end of it broke about a year or 2 ago, so this is just held on with, I drilled a hole into both these sides, put a copper rod through this hole, and then it's just held together with a copper rod and super glue, so it's a suboptimal solution. But anyway, so this is heated up in the oven before use, and then allowed to cool a little bit. But to keep it warm, I have under here a little trivet with 3. Let's see if I can give you a side view. A little trivet with 3 tea lights on it that are just going to help maintain the temperature of the stone, so it doesn't get cool. Because we want this surface to be just blood warm, which it is, because that'll help the cocoa butter in the beans melt as they're ground, which is really important. And you can see that the shape of the surface of the metate, it's concave, it slopes slightly, so it slopes away from the person who kneels at that end grinding towards this end where there's a little lip, and it's also very slightly convex that way. Convex, what am I talking about? Concave that way too. It sort of dips a little bit into the middle, so that when you grind the chocolate and it becomes liquid, it tends to puddle at this end. Now these devices, the metate and mano, are used for grinding all sorts of foodstuffs in Mesoamerica. They're used for grinding corn and spices, all sorts of things, and they're still in everyday use, particularly in the countryside, but in cities too. I mean, they're a very traditional piece of kit, but they are particularly good for grinding chocolate. Because they're made of granite, they're ever so slightly porous, so they do have to be cleaned very well. But the reason I grind my spices by hand on one of these and not in the chocolate grinder, the big machine there, is because this is easier to clean. I can put it in the sink and wash it with a wire brush and properly clean it. Whereas this, because it has the rollers are granite and the floor of the machine is granite, I prefer to keep any cacao I grind in there plain, just unflavoured, because I don't want any spices soaking into the stone in the machine. This is easy to clean, so I can grind. So what I tend to do is I grind the plain beans in there. I grind a smaller batch here every time I make a batch. I grind a smaller amount by hand, and I put a high concentration of spices in this amount, so that when I'm making the beverages, I add a small amount of the very spiced chocolate to a larger quantity of the plain chocolate and make a drink. Anyway, hope that is understandable. I will set my camera up and hopefully be able to show you how I actually grind the beans on this. So, right. Okay, so slightly awkward angle. Hello. So I'll be able to show you how the beans are ground on the metate now. I've put a small amount of whole beans here. I've placed a bowl at the end of it just to catch the residue. Grinding this little bowl, these beans, will probably take me in total about 3 or 4 hours. Maybe 1.5 to 2 hours to do the initial grind. Then I'll add the spices, and another 1 to possibly 2 hours, depending how lazy I am and how many breaks I take to grind the rest, which is a ridiculously long time. Mexican, usually women, but Mexican women who use this piece of kit could probably smash these beans to liquid within an hour and a half or so, but it is a lengthy process. It is worth it though, because even though doing it this way does produce a coarser grind, so there's a few smaller grains, so that's plenty for making drinking chocolate. This wouldn't be adequate for making eating chocolate because there'd be a gritty feel in the mouth, but for drinking chocolate it's phenomenal. And one of the key things about making drinking chocolate this way is that it's not the same as conching in a machine, which you can obviously hear in the background. It causes the evaporation of some of the organic acids as you grind the beans into a fine lacquer, and some of the acids and volatiles escape, but it preserves a greater complexity of flavor. You don't get the same degree of flavor flattening that you get when you conch it, but you do get a loss of the acidity, and I put that down to the way in which the beans are ground. My hypothesis is that when you smash the beans, you grind them to a very fine film, which is dragged back and forth across the surface of the metate. That is a much broader surface for evaporation or volatilization of some of the acids and oils to take place, but the process isn't repeated as long as it would be for conching. So it just seems to produce an optimal flavor balance to my mind. Anyway, I'll show you a bit of grinding on the metate. Hopefully you can see it, and my big head doesn't get in the way too much. We'll see. Right, so you can see that it's kind of quite liquidy now. There's a little bit left. I'm holding the mic up because I've de-shirted because you get really hot while doing this, and also all your clothes just get covered in chocolate, which is not great. So I'm just going to show you. One moment. How I remove this and put this into the... I swapped the bowl for a smaller bowl as well, because I don't think I'm going to have so much to need a huge bowl. So let me just do this. So this is the first lot. I've got probably 2 more lots to go. I've got the remaining half of the beans. One half is there, one half is there. So I've done 2 sets of grinds so far. And I'm only about 45 minutes in, so making pretty good time. There we go. Alright, so got a bit of chocolate in the bowl, which is great. All the chocolate's been ground. I have one little bowl of liquid chocolate. This is just the first grind. So I need to add my spices. This is a little blend of spices that I made earlier that I ground before. I'll do a separate video for these spices because these ingredients are all indigenous Mexican ingredients. So I'll do a separate video to show you how to prepare those. So I'm just going to dump these into the chocolate and then do a second grind of the whole lot to incorporate these already pulverized spices into the liquid cacao and to grind the cacao more finely and just mix everything together really well so that it's a completely smooth liquid. It's not going to be nearly as smooth as it would be if I'd done it in the machine, but I've already talked about that, why I do it separately. So I'm just going to get on and do that. I'll put the microphone aside. Wooden spoon. You'll notice that all the utensils that I'm using, except of course just for the skewer for cleaning some of the equipment, all the equipment that I'm using is either ceramic or wooden or stone. I'm trying to avoid using any reactive metal implements, or any metal in fact. Tastes very good. All right. So at this stage, this is just cacao beans, the toasted shelled cacao beans and the spices. There's no added fat and there is no sugar. So this is what's going to be used to make the tablets for the chocolate drinks. Right. Okay. Let's put you to one side. There we go. Right. And this second grind you'll see, or you probably won't see because I'll edit it, but this is a lot quicker. This whole process is much faster than the first grinding because one's really just homogenizing something that's already liquid. I don't know if the camera is showing this accurately, but this has a beautiful mirror sheen on it here, the surface of the liquid here where it's more finely ground, and this end has a more matte look. It's sort of semi-gloss. It's got a few little speckles in it because you can see the lumps of spice, the lumps of ground herb in there, and this end it's beautifully mirrored, which is what I'm going for. Okay, hello. So now that I've finished grinding the beans, I'm just going to show you how I set them into tablets. So this first lot is the is the liquid cacao that I ground on the metate with all the spices in. So I'll turn the camera around and show you that. Hello. So got my equipment set up, greaseproof paper, chocolate with the spices in, and wooden spoon, a little label, and a now very chocolate coated skewer for cleaning the utensils. So I'm just going to get going with this. Right, so firstly I need to stir it all up again because the spices will tend to settle at the bottom because this is still a liquid. Alright. Now let's get going. So I use approximately 1 spoonful and just make a dollop. I know the camera angle's not great. Sorry about the dodgy camera work and everything, folks. I'm learning as I go along. Alright. that's basically it. I'll just puddle it on the greaseproof paper and leave it there overnight, or in summer it might take 2 nights, but that will just set. And repeat until all of it is done. Okay, so that's some of the finished discs there. You can see on the paper, this side, these are all the spicy discs. You can see I have a slightly more wally finish, because as they cool, and they're still cooling now, they've not completely cooled, the fat from the cocoa butter slightly separates out. So this is the difference between these traditional Mexican drinking chocolate tablets and, say, eating chocolate, as well as the fact that there's no added fat or sugar, and I'm just using traditional Mexican or Mesoamerican ingredients. You don't temper this chocolate. Tempering is something that professional chocolatiers do to make eating chocolate. After adding extra fat and extra sugar and sometimes extra milk products, they'll carefully control the setting of the chocolate so you don't get this sort of separation of fat on the surface, which of course disturbs the appearance of ordinary eating chocolate and slightly alters its texture. But because we're going to be making these into drinks, it doesn't matter. I've done a little line on the paper here to show that everything on this side, these are, oh, focus, these are from the machine. This is chocolate from the machine, which if we take a closer look, you can see it's much smoother. The surface is much smoother. Now this is still partly liquid, so it's still drying, but if we compare on this side, you can see the surface of these guys is much more knobbly. So I'll see if I can take you into the next room, because in here I have the rest of the chocolate from the machine. So you can see here, this is all the rest of it. So this is an entire table's worth of chocolate. That's everything. So these discs of the chocolate from the machine, these will be used to make the basis of a chocolate drink, and then a little bit of the spiced chocolate will be added, and I'll show that actually how to turn these tablets once they've dried into a drink in a separate video. Now these are still very liquid, but as they dry, the bloom will occur, so the fat will start to separate and their appearance will change, and I will show that in the next video. Thanks for watching. Bye.